Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. While we wait for everyone to join, if you want to drop your name, what you teach, your title, school, where you're from, any other fun details, go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we'll get started in a minute. Thank you, Ryan, for going ahead and kicking us off in the chat. So welcome. Oh, there we go. Now everyone's coming in. Oh, Elise, North Carolina. I hope not in Western North Carolina. I am in Charlotte, so I hope you were safe through Helene. She really rocked the whole state, unfortunately. But today is going to be a really good day. We have a really good session. I'm very excited. We're going to be talking today about Dear Math, working with students to design beautiful math class experiences with Sarah over here. So let's go over some housekeeping. Oh, there's another Sarah Strong in the chat tonight. Helpful tips: if you'd like to access closed captioning, just hit the CC button in the bottom tray and show subtitles. You can participate and make comments at any time in the chat. You can also submit questions via the Q&A feature. We should have dedicated time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And you'll receive a certificate of attendance with your webinar recording via Zoom email. And now to introduce our lovely speaker, Sarah Strong is our speaker today. She works on the curriculum team here at Amplify, and she also works for the San Diego Teacher Residency Program. She loves creating spaces for students to share their math stories and collectively rewrite stories where everyone in the community can flourish. She also finds joy in supporting new teachers falling in love with teaching, which is very important. She's taught math to students in grades 6 through 12, as well as pre-service and graduate students. And her most recent publication, Dear Math, which is the namesake for this webinar, is a book she co-authored with one of her students about the stories students tell about math class and how teachers can co-design with students to have more positive and productive experiences. So Sarah, I will now stop sharing and kick it over to you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Shannon. I really appreciate you inviting me here, and it's really great to see all of you in the chat from all over, not only the US, but across the globe, it looks like. I'm so excited to share with you all today. I'm going to start sharing my slides, and then we'll kick it off. There will be a few interactive moments during this webinar. I'm not as used to the webinar format. I'm more used to very interactive teaching. So we'll be as interactive as we possibly can, given the constraints of our situation here today. Ooh, a bunch of people from Ohio. My mom is from Toledo, Ohio. We used to always go on vacation there when I was young. And now I live in San Diego, as previously mentioned. And I'm also excited to meet another Sarah Strong in the in the chat. How fun. Just as a quick introduction, I frequently do this talk with my co-author of the book, Gigi Butterfield. She was my student over the course of 4 years in high school. And we wrote this book together based on classroom experiences and debriefs that we had over time. Someone just came along one day and said, "Hey, what you guys are talking about is interesting. Why don't you write it in a book?" And she was more of a writer than I and was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So she sort of inspired all of this, and I'm so grateful to her. She's currently studying abroad in Europe, so she isn't as frequently able to join for these talks, but her spirit is in all of this work, and I like to acknowledge her. In fact, my mom's favorite parts of the book are the ones that Gigi wrote. So if you ever do get a chance to read the book, you can, if you want to skim through to the good parts, you can see the student reflections. She really highlights really important things. So yeah, some people who visited High Tech High. Yeah, I taught for 18 years at High Tech High, grades 6 through 12. That was the majority of my teaching experience. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to dig in. This is a talk about Dear Math letters, but more broadly, it is a talk about listening well. And I want to start by sharing with you what I mean by listening well. I think as teachers, there's a lot of ways we can listen to students. Some are very Very familiar. Teacher Prep 101. Listen to how they're doing with SEL check-ins, things like that. How are you today? What's going on in your life? We can't teach students well unless we know them well. Beautiful start. Then we might also listen for their math understanding. How are you making sense of this math idea? Those are probably the two foundational parts of listening well that we think about when we're heading into the teaching profession. But I want to talk about two others today. One is um, related to the math practices. And I think after Common Core came out, we had the math practice standards. This started becoming a little more fluent in some of our teaching work. How were you mathematical today? How did you attend to precision? How did you make sense of problems and persevere in solving them? How did you reason abstractly and quantitatively? And this is really, really, really essential to how students form an understanding of who they are as mathematicians. Very important. We'll be talking about that a little bit more later. The fourth way that we listen well to students is related to their math identity. And that's where Dear Math letters are going to come in. And math identity is related to this idea of like, what is your math story? What have been your experiences with math in and out of the classroom that brought you to me today in this classroom? And I would like to posit that it's really important that we understand our students' math story via them writing things like Dear Math letters so that we can engage them well. In fact, I would claim that listening well to our students' math stories has the power to radically transform our math classrooms for the better for all of our students. So without further ado, we're going to engage in a brief Dear Math activity ourselves. We always do the activity first before we share it with students. So I'm pretty sure Ryan is going to drop into the chat a link for you to click on. And then you can also alternatively go to student.desmos.com and type in the code that's there on the screen. Whoop. I'm going to stop sharing a bit while we get there. Let me make sure that you all have the link that you need. Ryan, do you have that link? Oh, yep, there it is from Ryan. And I can see a lot of you are hopping into the activity. Thank you. When you get into the activity, you should be able to see a prompt that invites you to start considering if you were writing a letter to math, what are the first things you would say? Maybe you've done this before and this is going to be a little revision or a summary. Maybe nobody's literally ever asked you to personify math in this way. Picture it as a person that you are chatting with, that you are sharing your feelings with, that you're like in a little relationship with, and you're trying to understand that relationship and make the relationship a little bit more healthy. Nice. I can see a lot of you are in the activity now. Just start typing that in. We're just going to take probably a minute or two to get some of those down. And then I'm going to share a couple. Because we're in webinar format, I'm going to just keep it anonymous and just highlight a couple of stories that stand out to me. Hmm. I see a lot of really interesting thoughts in here. A lot of love for math. Some people wanting to spread that love to their students. Beautiful. Some people liking the concreteness of math. Okay, I'm going to give you all about 15 more seconds. I'm going to highlight just a couple of letters that I see in here that are really standing out to me. not only because they're unique, but some of them have a lot of parallels to some student letters that I've been able to, that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. Mhm. Awesome. Okay. All right. Um, I'm going to pause you all in 3, 2, 1, and then I'm going to share my screen so you can see my dashboard. And I'm going to just share 3 letters that stood out to me for a couple of different reasons. So, this first one says, Dear Math, for the most part of my journey, or for the first part of my journey, I was indifferent to you. I was able to perform what was asked of me and didn't see you as anything other than procedures to perform. In high school, we grew apart. Excuse me, Mr. Sword sucked all of the joy and interest out of geometry, and I thought I was dumb. I avoided math for the rest of high school. In college, I met Professor Dan. He taught me that everyone is capable of learning math, but not everyone can teach it. He helped me fall back in love with you, and I made it my mission to spread, oh, and that's where it cuts off. Wherever you are, hopefully you're being grateful to this person for sharing their story. I especially wanted to highlight this story because of this middle part right here. It echoes a lot of the themes that I'll be highlighting later in student stories, where students felt dumb. That math class has been a space where, for whatever reason, and that's what we need to dig into, they feel dumb, left out, not included in the mathematical community. And so we're going to be talking about more student themes later, but I really appreciated how clearly and poignantly this person shared that story. All right, and then we have another Dear Math letter here to the right. It says, Dear Math, thanks for being clear and concise. Thanks for helping me see the everyday applications that make my life easier. Your friend, Jason. Thank you, Jason, for this story. The reason I highlighted this letter is this shows a theme that shows up in student letters too, is this notion that math is really useful, that it's really powerful, that I see a reason for it in my everyday life. That's one of the chapters of the book, actually. Dear Math, you are useful. And I appreciated how clearly Jason shared that. And then this final one, Dear Math, you caused me several emotions: fear, curiosity, unknown. I highlighted this response because, spoiler alert, but how the book ends is around this idea that the goal with our students is not that they would just be happy and feel like everything is going perfectly every single day in math class, because there are going to be struggles and there are going to be challenges. But the goal is that we support them in processing their feelings, their emotions, their identities, so that they can productively pursue mathematics in whatever way they want and or need to, without it being a gatekeeper for them, without them feeling like total idiots. And so we end the book on this idea of like, Dear Math, you are paradoxical. And I'm going to hold these sometimes conflicting emotions together and still maintain a whole understanding of who I am as a mathematician. And so I appreciated this person naming sometimes like paradoxical emotions. Okay, I am going to unpause you, and I am going to have you all work on, actually, let's keep that one open. If anyone wants to add to your Dear Math letter, you can. You can now work on screens 2, 3, and 4. There's a couple of reflection questions there. The first is, how does your math story, that letter you just wrote to math, shape how you teach math to your students? Some of you are already talking about how I love math and I want my students to love math. Well, how does that work? How do you do that? And then how does hearing other people's math stories, maybe some of the ones that you just heard in the when I shared those 3 stories, how does that give you new ideas? What about that first student who just genuinely felt like they were dumb in their class? How does that give you some new ideas or ways of thinking about how you might support students in having a whole and complete relationship with math? So take time to do that. And then there's a couple of checkbox questions because we're going to pivot from us to thinking to looking at student responses. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. I'm going to stop sharing here to oh, sorry, some people aren't able to join as a guest. Feel free to make an account or just follow along. Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to respond to those next few prompts. And then we'll do a quick share out again. Awesome. I see some people are still adding on to their letters on screen 1. If you haven't already, type your brief reflection in screen 2 and then head on to 3, 4. Those are the data collection points that we're going to be using to move our conversation forward about how students are thinking about math. But you'll note it is really important as we're thinking about doing some of this identity work with students that we do some of this identity work ourselves first. Where I taught at High Tech High was a project-based learning school. And one of the quotes that we always said there is do the project first. When you're giving an assignment to students, do the assignment first. So if we're going to have students write Dear Math letters, we got to start by doing it first. All right, I see people writing really, really reflective things on screen 2. Some people say they bring up their past experiences in math to normalize their challenges with students. That's beautiful. Someone said, it helps me remember the importance of helping students find their own unique approach to caring about math. That is so beautiful. This idea like, I liked math for this reason, but right in front of me are 32 students that might like it for other reasons, and that's okay. And that's actually really, really important to know. Ooh, someone said something really powerful. Make sure to not make students feel incapable. Okay, I'm going to sync you all to screen 3 now. It's going to automatically put you all on screen 3. Please do add some data there. I'm just using the sync to me tool in Desmos. I know it can be frustrating if you're on a different screen, but it's helpful because we need this data in order to push our conversation forward. So you can see I synced everyone to screen 3, and it's still anonymized, so our names aren't here. But I'm going to look through this as people are entering their data because we want to see in real time what are the emotions that the people in this room are bringing to their experiences in math class. Frequently, when we're talking just to math teachers, there's a lot more positive experiences than negative experiences. But let's take a look. Some people said dreadful, hierarchical, unnecessary. Ooh, we've got some intimidating here. And then, oops, sorry. As we get to the more positive emotions, wow, we're definitely skewed positive in this room. Useful, powerful, beautiful. Okay, so in this room of math educators and people who chose to go out of their way to attend a math related talk, we're skewed pretty positive. I'm going to sync you all to screen 4 now and take a few moments to put your data in for this screen if you didn't already. We're making a prediction about students' feelings, maybe based on the students in your class, things you've heard them say. Which of these do you think was most common in the hundreds of Dear Math letters we read? I'm pretty sure this one, yeah, this one is not a checkbox. You can only pick one because you're putting your foot in the ground on. I think this one was most common. Gigi and I, when we were writing this book, we had hundreds of Dear Math letters and we coded them across all of these themes. And right now you're making a prediction about which theme was most common. Let's see how the data distributes here. Some people predicted that students would see it as dreadful. No one predicted hierarchical, unnecessary, intimidating, some mixed emotions. All right. One last second for any more data. We've got people adding some things in here. Let me check the chat. Okay. All right. And then pretty soon we're going to go just back to my slides. All right. I'm going to unsync this and let everyone, visit whatever screen they want. But what it seems like what the most frequent prediction from that activity was most people were thinking students expressed intimidation, this idea down here in this like purplish maroonish color here. And honestly, that was my prediction too. But once we finished all of our coding, the most common theme in student letters, if we were in person, I'd have you all do a drum roll on the desk, was this idea of hierarchy. Now, you might not have predicted this because you're like, do students say hierarchy? What on earth do you even mean by hierarchy? Well, let me tell you what I mean by hierarchy. These are some examples of student letters who reference this idea of hierarchy. Maybe this can give you a better lens for what I mean when I say this was the most common themes in student letters. Students said things like, I've felt behind in math since elementary school and was afraid to speak up. Another student said, as the time flew by, I began to reach out farther. They took note and had me working with you beyond my years. I felt smart, accomplished, and intelligent, but as the rest of my peers caught up, I had no drive and I slipped behind. I would spend my next 4 years ignoring, pretending, and downright avoiding you. The embarrassment that I endured because I tried to reach ahead just shut me down. And then a third student said, another thing I'm angry about you is that I never saw anybody else feel the same way about you. I always saw other kids go easily along with your weird complicatedness, but I couldn't. So what is this idea of hierarchy? This idea connects to this image on the right. You can see I had another student who's a graphic designer actually draw some of these images for each chapter. It is the idea of that math is following a narrow path and that you're either ahead or behind or in the middle. And a brilliant researcher named Dr. Amy Parks had a quote about this. She researched this narrow path analogy. She said, on a path, one is always nearer or farther from the front. Similarly, this metaphor can cause teachers to interpret chunks of mathematical content as necessarily ordered. And this analogy she found is pervasive in the way that teachers talk, that students talk, that curriculum works, etc. And the thing is, we know that this is decidedly false. Students can approach math learning from a lot of different perspectives, ways of thinking, ways of understanding, and we can really celebrate the diversity of ideas that they're bringing to the classroom. And when we do, it can disrupt this narrow path analogy and actually help them have a better relationship with math because they're not saying like, well, I'm bad at this math idea, so I can't move on to these other math ideas. It's more like, this one's feeling a little bit confusing. Let me explore this idea over here, and then I might loop back to that, and that's going to be okay. As Gigi and I were writing this book, we had a variety of chapters that we got focus groups of students around to read and give us feedback on to make sure we were really representing their ideas properly. And this chapter was interesting because students had this takeaway that was like, you know what I realized? When you think about math this way, really nobody is happy because the people in the front are feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to stay in the front. It's very stressful. What if I lose my place? What if I don't stay the best? This is sort of like a fixed mindset that we've heard. And then people in the middle are like sprinting to try to catch up, and people who are back here just think they're not good enough. And it's a very, very harmful analogy. And this hierarchical way of thinking is damaging to students' math identities. And so I want to talk about some ways. As I bring up these themes, I'm going to share a couple of things that I tried in my class and co-developed with students over time to try to lessen some of these negative experiences with math, in particular hierarchy right now. So what I tried to disrupt some of these feelings of hierarchy was a routine called Belongingness buddies. A lot of research on hierarchy and this sense of like how I am doing in school is like how I am compared to all the people around me, and I'm either good enough or not good enough. Also shares that as students understand each other better and feel a sense of belongingness in class, it can disrupt those feelings of hierarchy. And so the belongingness buddies in my class, first off, one of my colleagues, Carly, she was the one that gave this first name Belongingness Buddies. So I like to always give a shout out to her. She loves the alliterations. And what Belongingness Buddies do is, you can see here at the bottom, they're assigned to one other person to check in on and support throughout the semester. They exchange contact information for a weekly check-in on assignments. That's part of their assignments, is to check in on each other. They fill in each other if they're absent. They text their buddy if they're running late to class. In classroom interaction. So they're really getting to know one another on a different level than just like any other random partner that they're with. Um, so an example of how this disrupted some of the hierarchical thinking in math class was, say we were doing like a visual pattern during class. At the end of class, I would say, what is one way that your belongingness buddy was mathematically brilliant today? Maybe they had just shared their thinking with each other. And there's a collection of things that students actually wrote down below. Sibel used hand motions to describe the symmetry that was seen on the pattern and helped me understand their thinking. Madison affirmed the way Marco saw it and shared the way she saw it differently. Sabo explored different quadrants of the graphs and came up with different ways to describe each individual part, and so on. And so you can hear the ways that students are describing each other as mathematicians is connected to their mathematical thinking. And not only that, a diverse set of ways of thinking mathematically. As students gain fluency in describing this in one another, it disrupts their hierarchical thinking. And it's no longer about, I'm not as good, I'm better than, I'm where I'm supposed to be, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. It's more about the mathematical brilliance and strengths and ideas that they're bringing to the class each day. Um, I frequently tell a story of belongingness buddies that I had during COVID. And I think this helps like not only spread belongingness as a class, but it also um, takes away some of the pressure as a teacher to like manage and hold all of the students at once, because they start communally holding and caring for one another. And during COVID, we had a student who we weren't sure where he went. We knew some challenging things were going on at home, and then one day he just disappeared. He was not in class anymore. We couldn't get a hold of him. Nobody knew where he was, and we were not sure for a week, the school, and we started feeling very worried. His belongingness buddies were the ones who were able to get in contact with him. He didn't have a cell phone anymore. His family all of a sudden had a big emergency and moved out of state. And via something with social media, the Belongingness buddies were able to find him. And then the school was able to send him a loaner laptop so that he could complete his senior year and graduate from high school. But I hold this example as a reason to promote belongingness and communal care in our classrooms beyond just the mathematical hierarchy, but just for basically the good of the humans in our classroom. Um, okay. I haven't checked the chat in a bit. Okay, great. Um, Thanks, everyone. So that was the theme of hierarchy that was most prevalent in student letters, this idea of like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm going to talk about a few more negative themes from student letters and what I tried with those themes. And then we're going to talk about a few of the positive themes in our webinar here today. So the two or some of the themes, and aren't these images so gorgeous? The student that drew them is just such a brilliant artist. Some of the negative themes that came up through student letters, as you saw when you did the Desmos activity, was dread. This feeling like, oh my gosh, this math monster is coming after me every day, wrapping its tentacles around me, and I'm trying to run away and I can't get away because I have to go to math class every day for an hour. And those were the dreadful feelings students expressed. Unnecessary. Why do I have to do this? Students talk about things like really long division problems, really obscure word problems where someone has 100 watermelons. That was another theme. Oppressive is a third theme that students talk about. And this one was arguably the most heartbreaking stories of students who wanted to do something in life, but they were failing math. And so they were held back from being able to do that thing. Some students talked about having to change their college dreams, where they wanted to go to college, their ability to go to college at all. And some there's a few stories of adults in there of people who changed their career path because people told them they were not good at math. So they decided, oh, instead of becoming a nurse, I guess I'll go find something else to do. And then this idea of intimidating. There is all this conversation about math. There's an in crowd of people who know what they're talking about. And then I am on the other side of that wall, not in it, almost stifled. We're going to dig into the two themes on here, dread and intimidating. Yeah, some of us feel dread about some other subjects too. So maybe we can use that to empathize with some of our students and think, well, how could I feel a sense of belongingness in that subject that I don't prefer? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about dread. When we talk about dread, here are some example student quotes, because I always like to make sure that the student voices are centered in all of this work. These are quotes from student Dear Math letters. Dear Math, I hate you. You fill me with deep dread in my everyday life. Dear Math, I never liked you, never will. You cause me so much pain. Oh, these letters are hard to read sometimes. I just want to acknowledge that. And I dare say my claim in inviting students to write these and read these is that we cannot create a pathway forward for students to build a more whole relationship with math unless we create a space for them to tell us their story as it currently is. And so when I'm about to read these letters, I go a deep breath and go, okay, there's going to be some negativity in here, and that's okay. I'm going to receive it because I'm going to forge a new path for these students. But I'm living in denial if I'm not creating space for them to share that story. Okay, we're not in person, so we won't do a turn and talk. But here are a few excerpts from the book because as I shared, the intervention for this idea of dread is inviting students to write Dear Math letters. And then, as we're going to talk about on the next screen, revise their letters, add to it over time throughout the course. And so on the left is an example of how I would launch a Dear Math letter assignment with students. I would say something like, as we start this school year, it's important that I get to know you as mathematicians. Who you are as mathematicians and the stories that formed you before you got here are incredibly important to me. It's my goal that you would all feel like you are learning and growing each day as individuals and as a collective math community. Without understanding who you are, I can't properly design and facilitate this math classroom for you. I'll start by reading my Dear Math letter to you. Then I would share my Dear Math letter. And then after my story, I ask, what did you hear in this letter? What surprised you? What parts of my story relate to yours? After the discussion, I say, today we're going to write Dear Math letters. I look forward to learning more about your math story. Thank you for sharing your stories with me. So that would be like how I might launch the Dear Math letter. And then in Google Classroom or however you're assigning things, I'll put the following questions for a prompt. Sometimes I'll add additional sentence starters. Depending on the age of students you're working with, you can modify. Yes, this is very similar to an autobiography. And I used to do autobiography assignments a lot. And then once I started having it phrased, I think the tweak with Dear Math letters, it's almost like can be a little bit more raw because they're like writing to math, but I think you can get similar ideas out of math autobiographies. So there's some questions for prompting here on the right. And then remember, we were talking about dread, and Dear Math Letters is an intervention to overcoming dread. Let me talk about how that works. When we think about Dear Math Letters as an intervention for helping students overcome dread, it's not only important for students to be able to surface some of their feelings, but I think it's also important for them to start concretely rewriting new things that they would say to math. And so the way the revisions work is this is just about launching Dear Math letters. Write one yourself, read it to the students, read their letters, invite them to share their stories. Then every few weeks, invite students to revise their math letters. Don't delete what was there, that's still part of their story, but add on new experiences and ways of thinking about math. So maybe you've just finished a unit on similarity. You were really trying to focus on supporting students and being creative and thinking about things in a variety of ways. So you might put a prompt like during this unit, I was creative by ... Or this unit, I worked really hard to collaborate with others by ... Right now, I'm going to share a video of one of my students, Sophia. She's going to read her Dear Math letter, and I want you to listen specifically for the ways that she not only shares her story, but then adds on, there's a little section at the end where she's revising and adding new things to her story. This was like partway through her year in my class. So I'm going to play this for you now.
Dear Math, you've been in my life for about 10 years, and honestly, I've never been glad about it. Back in elementary, I went to a public school, and I would come home with math packets every week. I hated how you made me feel. While all my classmates raised their hands high to answer questions, I would shrink in my chair and hide in the corner. I would even get up to drink water so I wouldn't be chosen. I hated the idea of answering a question and being laughed at. Back then, I learned that if I answered wrong, I was dumb. Because of this, I hated asking for help in front of others. Up until freshman year, I got much more comfortable. Even now, I'm plagued with the trauma from 3rd to 8th grade math class. For years, I hated you. I was too ashamed to get help, so I just sunk deeper into a hole of confusion and frustration. The one time I remember being okay with you was in 3rd grade. My teacher had a great system for learning multiplication, and I made it my goal to memorize the multiplication chart from 0 to 12, and I did. I practiced every week until I got really good. I felt like I had unlocked a new superpower. Thank you for that. Now that I'm at High Tech High, I feel like I have a much better mindset, and I really feel comfortable with my class and my teacher. Math, you have no power over me. I've grown in multiple ways this year. I now have the power to ask questions without stress. I hope to grow more when working with others. Our relationship has been a series of struggles and solutions, and you will always be a big part of my life. From Sophia Lopez.
So you can hear her Dear Math letter, as it was originally written, had a series of ups and downs, but overall, she did not arrive to high school feeling like she had a lot to offer. And so you could hear specifically her reflecting on growing with asking questions without feeling too intimidated, and then talking actively about what she's still working on, which is collaborating, sharing ideas with others. And she added those things on through a series of revisions. And I'm just so grateful for her for sharing her math story so candidly and going out and writing those revisions. So that is the end of our conversation about dread. And I am going to share the link to these slides at the end so you can reference back to them. But that that is where we're going to end our conversation about dread, the intervention being that we invite our students to write Dear Math letters and then continue to revise them over the course of the year. I am going to move on and share about the next theme, which is one that you all talked about a little bit in your Dear Math letters, and then even predicted students might feel a lot. This is the idea of intimidation. Excuse me. Students say things like, Dear Math, I don't like you. You frustrate me and make me feel inadequate. You make me feel small. You're confusing, and the more I find out about you, the more complex you seem to get. As soon as I walk through the door, my confidence immediately starts plummeting when I see you covering the walls from head to toe. You intimidate me. Dear Math, when I stood up and I couldn't explain a problem, I was so embarrassed. And so you can see this feeling of intimidation is different than hierarchy, where students are like comparing themselves and being in the wrong spot. It's different than dread, where you just all out hate it. It's clearly this feeling of being small, of being less than, of being not good enough, of being inadequate. And this was a pretty common theme in students' letters, not as common as hierarchy or dread, but a pretty common theme. Let me talk to you a little bit about what I did to combat these feelings of intimidation in my class. And I got to warn you, it's a little counter to what you might think someone might do to counter intimidation. I decided that in order to support students with intimidation, I actually needed to raise the bar on how frequently they were talking and sharing out with the class and with each other every single day. I decided that they needed to get fluency in talking about math with the people around them so they could get used to. It's not about being right or wrong, it's about sharing ideas. And so I made it my goal that every single day in the first 10 minutes of class, every student would say something to the people next to them about math. And then at least once a week, they would share something out loud with the class about math during our warm-up. I lowered the intimidation by inviting 2 students each day to be the discussion leader and the scribe and lead the warm-up. And so you can see in that picture on the right, that's a picture of 2 students. One is the discussion leader who's writing, who's holding the clipboard. And the one on the right, or the one on the left, sorry, the one on the left in the picture is the scribe. They're writing down students' ideas. The students out in the class raise their hand and share their thinking. So as you can see in the bullets here, this is how I did the daily discourse, another alliteration. Start class each day with a warm-up that's phrased sort of openly. What do you know, think you know, or wonder about X? Anything related to the math you're working on, a graph, a function. Sometimes it would be like f of x equals x squared minus 4. What do you know, think you know, or wonder about that? We're in our quadratic functions unit. Give students a few minutes of individual think time, then have them share one thing they wrote at their table. Any idea is a good idea. They just are saying the math out loud to someone at their table. Maybe it's like, why is that little 2 there? The exponent. Maybe they don't have the mathematical language for it yet, but they're practicing asking a question or making a note. Then 2 students lead the discussion of their classmates. And what the teacher does is sit in the back and listens, take notes. I always had a list of my students' names and I would note who was sharing on what day. And they knew that in order to get their warm-up credit for that week, they needed to share an idea out loud at least one time. And what I would also do, and this, you know, your classroom community, but what I eventually started doing was being very public about the data collection of who was talking, because some students would do lots of talking and they had very little awareness about the amount of space they were taking up. So once they saw the data collection sheet, they'd say, oh my gosh, I already talked 7 times this week. And it's like, yeah, how can you create space so that we can hear the brilliance of others around you? And then some students, we haven't gotten to hear your voice yet this week. How might I support you in sharing your thinking? And so you can hear, while this might sound extra intimidating, like, oh my goodness, the students have to talk more. I believe that we are doing students a disservice if we remove intimidation by lowering the cognitive effort that they have to put in. Whoever's doing the talking in class is doing the learning. So if we remove the space for them to talk, they're not learning as deeply as they might be. So we have to create space for them to talk more, but in a less intimidating way. So that is daily discourse, the routine that I tried, and you can read more about that in the book if you're interested. Okay, we're going to pivot to a different set of chapters now. And this chapter is actually the middle of the book because Gigi and I weren't sure if this was positive or negative or if it was just neutral. But the more we talked about this chapter, the more people seemed to resonate with this. In fact, actually, a lot of math teachers have resonated with this theme. The name of this chapter is Math, I Have a Fraudulent Fondness for You. And this phrase came from Gigi's Dear Math letter because Gigi said, I like being told I'm good at math and getting good grades in math, but I don't know that I really like math. I believe I have a fraudulent fondness for you. And you can see in this image, the student has their A plus, it's shining and glowing, and around them is, whatever math assignments, tests are falling by the wayside. They don't even matter because we have the A plus. So let me talk to you a little bit about what this sounded like in student letters. And maybe you right now are connecting to this like, oh my gosh, I think I felt that at some points. I know I certainly did. And when I read Gigi's Dear Math letter, I thought, oh, I haven't heard anyone express it so articulately like that. I really appreciate it. Here is what students say that express sort of a fraudulent fondness for math. I was so attracted to that feeling I got when I was able to get a correct answer and show off. I so vividly remember being the first to complete the times table problems in my class, and for doing so, I received a very cool origami star. I mastered you like you were nothing. I remember getting a star sticker on my math sheet, and that made me really happy. It was then I realized that I liked you. So you can see across these themes, there's this sense of like, I kind of liked math, but the like that they're showing is not actually connected to the math itself. It's connected to someone or some assignment telling them that they got it right, that they were good enough, that they were fast enough. And this sat with us sort of funny because it's like, is that what we want? Or do we want our students to have more of a genuine fondness for mathematics? And here's where I need to give a shout out to researchers Elizabeth Cohen and Rachel Lotan, because you've probably already heard a little bit about some themes during Belongingness Buddies where students were doing this. But in order to combat a fraudulent fondness and give students language to describe a more genuine fondness of math, there's a classroom practice called multiple abilities treatment. And the way I would use it in my class is that before we would start an assignment or a lesson, probably like once or twice a week, maybe once a week toward later in the year, I would have students describe one of their mathematical strengths, and based on a list that I would construct related to the activity that day, and name what their mathematical strength was that they were bringing to their group that day. And I would say very clearly, and this is what Elizabeth Cohen and Rachel Lotan also say, all of us has some of these, but none of us has all of these. And as students are able to describe their mathematical strengths, the things that they're bringing to the table with them, they're able to broaden the ways that they are thinking of who they are as a mathematician beyond, I got it right, I got a gold star, I did it fast, you were nothing, so I just mastered you like this. And they're able to actually describe ways of being mathematical. I talked about this a little bit in the beginning too, where we're listening for the mathematical skills that students are bringing to the table, not just how they're doing or how they're understanding the content. And I found that in giving students a lot of fluency with these kinds of ideas, they start building a more genuine fondness for math because they start realizing like, however they're showing up that day, whatever strengths they're bringing to the table are immensely useful to their class. So that was the idea of fraudulent fondness. Okay, we're going to end this webinar with a little bit of positivity. So we already talked through hierarchy, dread, intimidation, fraudulent fondness. I want to end with a couple of a couple of positive themes that emerged, and there were plenty. And when we read the positive themes, the thought isn't, how can I disrupt these? But more like, how do I get more? How are students expressing this positivity so I can bring more of those things to class with me? You can see the themes on here in these gorgeous drawings. There's students say, Dear Math, you're beautiful. Dear Math, you're fun. Dear Math, you're useful. Dear Math, you're powerful. And then Dear Math, you're a little paradoxical. I'm going to try to figure out how I hold all of these different emotions together. Yes, aren't these drawings so amazing? Did I say this already? She literally, I would read the letters out loud with that theme, and she would actively draw while I was just reading the letters, and she would draw whatever sort of came to mind. And the result was just amazing because there was sometimes a lot of specificity. She'd hear a little phrase and build it in there. Even the beautiful one with the fractal eyes, some students just were talking about how fractals were so beautiful, and she incorporated into the eyes. Okay, so we're gonna end by talking about beautiful, and I think we're actually gonna end with talking about beautiful today because of time. So when students talk about math being beautiful, they say things like, although you've been difficult, I see the beauty of you. You've given me some of the best supporters and the biggest aha moments. You know how to make us the best we can possibly be. Thank you. And I want to talk about a practice I did in my class that was one way that students could experience the beauty of mathematics. This is a practice that I did. A bunch of my colleagues at High Tech High, we started doing this at the end of each unit as well. We would invite the students to create a visual summary of learning of everything they did throughout that unit. Now, some teachers, when they give a unit test, they'll have students make like a little note card or things like that. I decided to open that up and have students really visually represent in any way that they wanted to what they learned about this unit. Now, they had all our anchor charts and our notes and things like that. So the math content sort of stayed the same, but the visuals students brought in literally blew my mind. I thought I could not have I could not have assigned something that gave me such beautiful work as this. So I'm going to show you a few examples because I think the pictures sort of speak for themselves when you look through them. So, and there's a QR code there. What I've found is that the first time you do this, the summaries of learning might be kind of average. The students will try a little bit, but then as you pick out really beautiful examples and highlight the things that are impressive, they get more and more creative and beautiful over time. And I share this QR code also because if you're going to do this practice with your students, you can start by showing them some of these examples, and it really raises the bar on the kinds of work that they produce their first way through. So this was in Integrated Math 1, we did a unit on constructions and rigid motions, and the student decided to construct the word constructions and then transform in a variety of ways the word rigid motions and show all the notation and things like that. And I thought, wow, I could not have thought of doing that. That is so beautiful. Here's a piece of work from an artist she was such a brilliant drawer. And what she would do is this was from our univariate statistics unit, and she created little people that represented all of the things from that unit. Hello, my name is Boxplot. My name means that you organize a data set, find the median, Q1, Q3, minimum and maximum, and put it on the number line. Q1 is the median, things like that. So you can see she's expressing mathematical precision in a very artistic way that made sense to her. And I thought, wow, I could not have thought of doing that. My mind is blown. And she would go home on the weekend and work on these because she just thought it was so fun. Here's a more straightforward one, a student dividing their paper into quadrants. And I'll just click through this student had a recurring character that would talk to you about each unit, and the character would come back and share something, which I thought was so clever. And this is one of my favorites. This was actually Gigi, my co-authors. I think she was in a intro to psych college class she was taking concurrently when she was in high school. And she was learning about Sigmund Freud. And she, some way in her head, made a connection, not like necessarily, it wasn't that it necessarily enriched the mathematics or the psychology, but it actually made a unexpected connection in the words she was reading. And the students were like mind blown that she made this. It was like scared to dilate, psychoanalysis, codependency. And so she brought all these words in, and just that ability to like think about this math idea and this psychology ideas in a new way was just fascinating. And so you can see there's a bunch through here that can be examples. There are some middle school ones that are down a little bit further. You can see the middle schoolers, what they're thinking about, a dessert factory, things like that. And so no matter what grade you teach, hopefully you can see a little bit of inspiration for the kinds of beautiful work that students are able to create when given the chance. And I share these with you because as I was surprised, I loved being surprised, I guess. And each time the students turn these in, because I thought, I thought I was making good assignments. And then the way they share their learning and thinking back to me just was so exciting and so beautiful to me as a teacher, as it hopefully was for them. Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to skip powerful and loop back to this so we have time for a few questions. When I started this talk, I talked about how we were talking about listening well to students. We listen well by checking in on how they're doing and how their math understanding is coming along, of course, but we also layer in now these important pieces of how are students being mathematical so that they can feel belongingness, celebrate one another, get rid of some of those feelings of like intimidation and hierarchy, and express who they are as mathematicians really well. And then finally, how do we understand their math story so that we can design math classes where all of them can flourish, can thrive, can feel whole. That claim here is listening well to our students' math story has the power to radically transform our math classrooms. I was excited to share some of these ways that listening to students and working with them transformed my math classroom. I would encourage you to invite students to write Dear Math letters, read them, give them space to revise, and then work with them to create math class where they can have a genuine fondness for math, where they can see the beauty of math, feel the power of math, and more. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to stop sharing, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Thank you, Sarah. This was amazing. And I'm going to be thinking about Trigman Freud all evening now. That is so funny. Let me share my screen. All right. So we had one question come in through, let's see. Oh, now we're having more questions come in through the Q&A. What recommendations do you have for students who maybe aren't confident expressing themselves in English or struggle with writing?
That is such a great question. I presume it's about writing the Dear Math letter by itself, but maybe for any of these, they might be very language rich examples. I would offer a couple of ideas for that. One is allow them to write their letter in their native language, whatever language is most comfortable to them. And then as a teacher, we can use technology to translate the letter. I know even on my phone, I'm always mind blown. I can literally, just translate some writing right in front of me and read something that was written in Spanish, and now I can read it in English. So you can invite them to write in that way. Alternatively, and especially for younger students, we can invite them to draw pictures and show their thinking visually. And then if there is, some students have some ability with the language, but not a lot, we can use simple sentence starters and things like that to get them going on their thinking.
And the other question we had was, do you have any elementary examples? I know you taught 6 through 12, so it might be hard to find some elementary ones.
Yeah, that slide deck of summaries of learning. I thought that question was about summaries of learning, but maybe it's about everything. I have not a lot of experience teaching elementary, so I would need to rely on the brilliance of the elementary teachers in the room to share any thinking on that. But So the youngest I have examples of is from 6th grade, both of Dear Math letters, of summaries of learning, and of things like that.
And then we had one question come in through the chat. Are there benefits to having them do a math timeline to enhance their Dear Math letter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we didn't have time today, but sometimes an alternate version of the Dear Math letter is a graphing story, and you can see, oh, I have to make my background not blurred, but you can see these are some graphing stories. And if anyone is interested, I can there's a Dear Math Desmos activity where they can sketch out their journey in a chronological fashion. And that's kind of fun, especially for older students. You can bring in some real nice mathematical language around maximums and minimums and intercepts and things like that. But then they can also annotate in more of like a chronological way. Some students like that. Some students who love writing, which I know maybe in a room of math educators isn't all our favorites, loved digging in and actually like getting to write out everything. So it totally varies. You can offer a few options or have them do both.
Well, wonderful. And I think that's all the questions. You did such a good job. No one even had anything to ask. So we'll wrap up today just with some more free resources from Amplify. If you want more free PD opportunities, we have a couple more math webinars this fall. You can join our Math Insider list to be the first to get updates or more invites on events. You can find new activities to use today by getting a free teacher account in Desmos Classroom, which Sarah used in her presentation. And we'd also love for you to check out Amplify Desmos Math, which is our brand new math program for K-12 that just launched this fall. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Sarah. This was a wonderful presentation. I'm so happy we were able to do this. And everyone, just have a beautiful rest of your Monday.